Hey, what's going on, everybody? Mark from Rams Up here. Got a few things to cover this episode, some news and notes, and then I'm going to dive into the NFC West punters and kickers, see how they stack up against each other. Rams heading off to Maui, and I'm wearing one of my Hawaiian shirts to celebrate the event. Wrong island, but Hawaii nonetheless. And it's pretty cool. The Rams have added that a Hawaiian themed logo. They hired a Hawaiian born artist out of LA, Aaron Kai, to mark up that field. The Rams logo with a Hawaiian theme. Pretty cool. Check that out. Their June 18th practice that is open to the public is sold out. So that's a good sign. Good sign for Rams. Good sign for the Rams and Ram fans, I think. So we'll be reporting on that. And tonight, Monday night, Ohtani pitching for the Dodgers. That's exciting. And UCLA in the College World Series. That game could be over. The Monday game could be over by the time you hear this. Hey, episode 762 on the podcast. And so let's talk about a player who wore number 62. Now, I've already talked about Adam Timmerman and Harvey Dahl, two very good offensive linemen. Timmerman maybe more so than Dahl. Dahl was good, but had a bit of a mean streak that got him into trouble sometimes. But let's talk about Bill Bane. And he's a guy that we've forgotten about, at least I have. I'm guessing most of you have. And the reason is he played with some really good offensive linemen that ''maybe got more of the spotlight than he did. And there were some really good offensive linemen that came before him and after. But he was a tackle guard, 6'4", 279 pounds, out of Los Angeles and St. Paul High School. I've been there one time, I'm pretty sure. I think it was a high school playoff game, Palmdale versus St. Paul. Not 100% sure on that, but I think I got that right. So he played at San Diego City College and then the University of Colorado, an All-American offensive lineman in 1974, and then drafted by the Packers in the second round of the 1975 draft. Ended up playing 2 years with the Broncos and then back to the hometown Rams, played for the Rams for 6.5 years, 41 starts from 1979 to 1985. Now, I see him usually listed as a guard, but I checked that 1984 season kind of randomly, and he was a tackle on that squad. So he played both. And on that 84 offensive line, some really good players, Irv Pankey, Doug Smith, Kent Hill, and Dennis Hara. And maybe that's why I forget about Bill Bane. But this offensive line was, these are the guys that helped Eric Dickerson have such great success with the Rams. So pretty darn good unit. So what else are we going to talk about here? Let's talk about this top 10 running back list that was published by Matt Johnson of SportNot. And maybe this is just clickbait, but he listed Ashton Ganti as his number 10, the 10th best running back in the NFL in 2025. And I know he's probably, he could end up being right, but I don't think it's fair to some pretty darn good football players that at least have a few carries in the league. By the way, he had Kyron Williams at number 9, which I think is fair enough. But it certainly seemed premature to me to label him as one of the best running backs in the NFL right now. I'm quoting some other folks here. No Jonathan Taylor on this list, no Joe Mixon. I'd even make an argument for David Montgomery, James Conner, Aaron Jones. Let's pump the brakes on Ashton Ganti as the 10th best running back in the NFL. Then Yahoo Sports talking about the Rams tight end group. We've been talking about it, and they had a nice little article, Brock Vieira of Yahoo Sports did, talking about not only the 12 personnel, but how much damage this unit could do with Nacua and Adams as the wide receivers in a 12 personnel configuration. Tyler Higbee, Terrence Ferguson, Nacua, and Adams. That might be the best 4 skilled players you can line up out there. if you think about it. Tutu Atwell, Jordan Whittington, they'd get out there for 11 personnel, or maybe you give Devontae a breather and run a 12 personnel with Tutu and Nakua. A lot of options here. Bottom line is this 12 personnel unit has a lot of flexibility in the personnel they can run out there for 12 personnel, wide receiver and tight end wise. So I think that's what Vieira was trying to point out. He writes a lot of good Rams content, and I recommend you check that out. Now, some random news and notes here. Cam Akers signs with the Saints. So he has been with the Rams, traded to the Vikings, then to the Texans, back to the Vikings, and now with the Saints. And, he's had a couple really serious injuries he's dealt with. So we may be seeing Cam Akers once again this year. So best wishes to him. He is resilient, if nothing else. And I read an article that said Brandon Ayuk is on track for a potential Week 5 return. Now it's very early. That could change. So he could make his 2025 debut in that Thursday night game against the Rams. And I saw an article, who is the most underrated Ram? And it was Alaric Jackson. How timely was that? They probably published that a day before that news broke. I just thought that was a little bit interesting. And then Cody Benjamin writing that he thinks that the Raiders may be the most likely destination for Ramsey. So we'll see how that plays out. I know Ram Nation is a little bit split on, if Ramsey should come over to the Rams, and, highly dependent on the price, of course, and the expectations, what he can actually realistically contribute to this defense at this point in his career. Now, I wanted to talk about Emmanuel Forbes one more time. I've talked about him a lot recently, I know. And the reason I want to talk about him is Scott Richmond, a friend of the show, forwarded a video to me, and it was one of my favorite YouTube channels, actually, and that's Saturday Morning Inspection. And these guys do a lot of good content, and they seem to come back to the Rams a lot because I think they just enjoy talking about the success of this Rams front office and the coaching staff. And they talked about Forbes quite a bit. Well, I think the entire segment was dedicated to Forbes, actually, and how he is bulking up. But the main point I wanted to add, maybe I'm patting myself on the back here too much, but I said this a few days ago, that Darion Kendrick release is more related to Forbes and how he is doing in camp than it is to a potential Ramsey signing. And now I could be proven wrong. Of course, if they sign Ramsey, not going to be a trade. If the Dolphins release Ramsey and the Rams sign him, I don't think that's necessarily proof that that's what the Kendrick move was tied to. So we'll never really know. But I think the Rams are just thrilled with what Forbes is doing, how he's competing, how he's accepting coaching and bulking up. And they also pointed out on this segment, this was the most striking information I found, was that Emmanuel Forbes and Travis Hunter, their overall grades in college were almost identical. Overall grade and coverage grades almost equal. And they were maybe piling it on a little bit thick, but basically saying the Rams may have picked up Travis Hunter for basically nothing. And, what? They could be right. And if that's the case, man, the Rams secondary is going to be in really good shape. That CB1 we've been talking about, if he really elevates his play to what we saw in college, I think the Commanders will show that they gave up on him way too early, and the Rams have a gem, have a CB1 in-house without using a draft pick. And maybe I'm, being way too optimistic here, but I'm just saying the data from college would indicate it's essentially a possibility. Travis Hunter is probably going to end up being a generationally good player. So it's a little bit of a stretch, I realize it. But hey, let's be optimistic. Let's look at this glass half full. Emmanuel Forbes could be a stud cornerback for our Rams. And the last thing I wanted to talk about before we get to the punter and kicker conversations, Pro Football Focus's Kyle Soap, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Soppe. He did his preseason rankings. It's a little early for that. And he had the Rams offense ranked at number 11. And at first, as Ram fans, as we typically react, wait a second, that's not fair. But, I think it actually probably is at this point. Kyle admitted that Devontae Adams is likely an upgrade over what we got from Cooper Kupp last year. Puka, his yards per game is just outstanding, just needs to stay healthy. The team's really deep at running back, veteran offensive line. I don't think this took into account the Lyric Jackson situation. And he's optimistic about this offense. And when you say 11th, that doesn't sound so great. But when, you got to look at the teams ahead of them, it's probably a fair assessment. And maybe they'll overachieve a little bit, climb into the top 7 or 8. But I don't take too much issue with that. And then he had the Rams defense ranked 24th. And I really started to get spun up about that. And then I started looking at the data and looking at some of the facts. And as pleased as we were with the Rams defense at the end of last year, we have to still have a little bit of concern, a little bit of consternation about how this defense is going to perform. I think it's going to be much better than the 24th best defense, but I think it may be unrealistic to think they're suddenly going to be a top 10 or 12 defense unless someone like Emmanuel Forbes really comes through. They stay super healthy. Maybe Josiah Stewart adds even more to that pass rush. These linebackers they drafted come through. They traded for and drafted, meaning Landman and Paul. But, the last 3 seasons, overall, their defense has been, nothing special. There's times where it's looked special, but over the course of the entire seasons, not so much. And Kyle did point out that only one of their first 4 picks were on D, and is adding Poona Ford, Nate Landman, and 2. I'll get back to that. 2 rookies enough to improve this defense. It's actually 3, Josiah Stewart, Paul, and Ty Hamilton. So still, is that enough? Adding Nate Landman. And I think you could argue, hey, also having a Killer Witherspoon in camp all summer and Darius Williams 100%. And maybe, just maybe, Emmanuel Stewart is a really, really good cornerback. So let's continue our look at NFC West position groups. We're diving into special teams, specifically the kickers, the punters, and the place kickers. And, a lot of folks say that special teams is 1/3 of the game, offense, defense, and special teams. You know what? I don't really buy that. I know people like to say that, but I don't know. I don't think special teams are nearly as important as offense or defense. But hey, if you disagree with me, have at it. Let me know. Although the Rams did win a critical game last year, thanks to their special teams, that game against the 49ers, 2 big special teams plays. But in both cases, the Rams didn't kick the ball. One was a fake punt, and the other was a kick return, the punt return by Xavier Smith. So special teams are important. Are they as important as offense and defense? I'm not so sure, but hey, maybe I'm wrong. I have been before. So as far as these position groups go, I've talked about quarterbacks. I've talked about running backs, tight ends. I've talked about centers, interior defensive line, inside linebackers, I think. Safety has kind of been all over the place. And I also did that septut analysis, my nerdy look at the top, the 7 components needed to be a successful football team. So we got into some position groups in that regard. So we're going to look at punters and kickers this episode. As boring as it could be, hey, if you think special teams are important, then we got to look at the punters and kickers. And the first guy we'll talk about is Arizona's kicker, Blake Gillikin, out of Penn State. Let's go back a few years to 2021. He was named the Saints starting punter, and the Saints released longtime starter Thomas Morstead. We'll talk about him in a minute. So eventually released by the Saints, Gillikin was in 2023 and signed by the Cardinals in October of that year. So he's been with the Cardinals for a season and a half, basically. Last year, third in the league with a 44.2 net, sixth in average, 49.7 yards. Not bad. Half of his punts were inside the 20. So he's a solid kicker. Can't deny that. I think the Cardinals are in good shape with Gillikin back there. Now, the 49ers with Morstead, a little bit troublesome here. I mean, he's a veteran. He's been around forever. Comes over from the Jets. He's been with the Saints, Jets, Falcons, Dolphins, back with the Jets again, and now the 49ers after the 49ers released Mitch Wishnowsky. But last year with the Jets, Morstead just a 40.7 yard net and just 30% of his kicks inside the 20. So, Morstead on the tail end of his career, I think the 49ers are kind of grasping at straws trying to figure this position out. I think they may, nothing to get excited about if you're a 49er fan. I don't expect Morstead to be the answer there. Just serviceable at best would be my guess. Now there's Michael Dixon out of Australia and the University of Texas. When he came on the scene with the Seahawks, I felt that like there was a changing of the guard, basically, as far as the top punters in the game. Johnny Hekker stepping aside for Michael Dixon. Not that there's a big drop-off in Hecker's production, but I think Michael Dixon surpassed him at some point. And they're still two of the top punters in the game. He was last year 6th in average, 4th in net last year, 31 kicks inside the 20. So he is solid, gets the job done. I think the Seahawks are in good shape there. And then there's Ethan Evans of the Rams out of Wingate. Don't hear that very often. He had 30 kicks inside the 20, just one less than Dixon. Had just a 46-yard average, but he was second in the league as far as percentage of kicks inside the 20, 54%. So Ethan Evans, I felt like there was times early in the year, I remember my special assistant making the comment, hey, Ethan, get out of the weight room and maybe start practicing your punting. But later in the year, he really came on, especially with his ability to get kicks inside the 20. And no doubt he has a big leg. So Ethan Evans on the upswing for the Rams, I think. Now let's look at the place kickers, and we'll start with Arizona again, Chad Ryland. And with the kickers, I looked at two things. I looked at how many kicks they had, 50-yard kicks they had. I looked at their overall percentage. And the third thing I did look at is what Pro Football Focus had to say about them. So Ryland, 4 50-plus yarders, 87.5% overall. And Pro Football Focus had him graded out at 90.2 last year, which is 5th out of the 43 NFL kickers they assessed. And he became only the 3rd player in NFL history to have 3 game winners, that's in the 4th quarter or in overtime, in his first 4 games with the team. So he endeared himself to Cardinals faithful real fast, proven to be a real clutch kicker. So he's a guy that's on the upswing, obviously. Now, when we talk about Jake Moody, let's just forget for a moment that he was a 3rd-round pick. There's no doubt that he's been a disappointment in that regard. But he did have 4 50-yarders, same as Ryland. Just a 70.6 grade overall, 70.6% on his field goals overall. And the 49ers signed Greg Joseph just recently, who has appeared in 75 games with the Browns, Titans, Vikings, Giants, Commanders, and Jets. So Greg Joseph definitely a guy with experience to come in and bring bring some competition to camp. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Moody is going to be their kicker come opening day. It could very well be Joseph, but let's assume it's Moody. And he could end up being a decent kicker. I got to go back to what Paul Walia said. Very wise man, Paul Walia, a friend of the show. We haven't heard from him in a while. But the point he made is the problem with drafting a kicker in the third round, geez, is that it just puts a lot of pressure on a position where there's already tons of pressure. You bring in an undrafted kicker, they're just good to go, step into the limelight, and it's still going to be a lot of pressure, but not nearly as much as if you're a high draft pick, a premium draft pick. Cardi coming in the sixth round. I think it was the sixth, right? A lot less pressure. Just a good reason not to spend a draft pick, and certainly not a high draft pick on a kicker. And I think Jake Moody has really suffered because of that. So we'll see what happens. It looks like it was a really big mistake. The 49ers have not drafted well recently, and Jake Moody's a good example of that. And he could end up being a perfectly fine kicker, but at this point, a scary proposition for 49er fans if they're relying on Moody to win big games for them. Then there's Jason Myers of the Seahawks. He had 9 50-yarders and 86.7% overall, a Pro Football Focus grade of 91.2, ranking third in the league out of 43 qualified kickers. And he also hit a career longest 59-yarder. And remember, he did have a couple of, surprisingly, a couple of gaffes. One of them, I think, was against the Rams. I wanted to go look at that. So maybe, some of the luster has been knocked off the great Jason Myers, but still one of the best in the league. He could be my kicker any day. Very solid guy. Seahawks are in good shape at punter and kicker. And then there's our Joshua Cardi. And there was a time, just like Evans early in the year, we were like, got to find a kicker. Time to go find a kicker. And by the end of the year, it started to feel a lot better about him. He had 7 50-yarders, 85.3% overall, and Special Teams Player of the Month for December and January. That's a combined award for that last 5 weeks, essentially. So he was really good at the end of the year. Clutch in a couple of games, big-time kicks, scored all the points in that final win over the 49ers, had the game winner in the first game against the 49ers. So, you got to feel good about where Joshua Cardi is right now in his career and hopeful that it will continue. The trajectory will continue in an upward direction. Okay, so what are my final takeaways for the punters and kickers? And I took a Roger Ebert approach here. How many stars do I award each of these players, the punters and kickers across the NFC West? Max score is 5 stars, obviously, and we'll start with the Cardinals. I'm giving Gillikin and Ryland 3.5 stars. Gillikin, I think he could very easily end up being a 4-star punter. Need to see a little bit more out of him. And same for Ryland. I mean, you got to give him kudos for the clutch kicking after he joined the Cardinals last year. But prior to that, he hadn't kicked to that level. But very promising 3.5 stars here. The Seahawks, I'm giving both their guys 4 stars. And you could argue for even more than that. Both been around for a while and both solid. Myers tailed off a little bit as far as clutch kicks, at least what I saw, but the numbers still pretty solid. 4 stars for both of them. And the 49ers, Moody and Morstead, I'm sorry, 2 stars apiece. I'd really be concerned if I was a 49er fan what's going to transpire in their kicking game this year. And the Rams kickers, I went with 3.5 stars for both Evans and Cardi, and they could, just like the Arizona kickers, could very well end up being 4-star players. We have to give it a little bit more time, though. Second half of last season, they're both easily 4 stars. First half, probably closer to 3. maybe even 2.5 in Cardi's case, at least for a moment there, a couple of games there. But overall, 3.5. And I'm trying to uh, diminish my Rams favoritism here. Maybe I could be a little bit more generous. I think trying to be unbiased is maybe actually hurting their scores here, but I think 3.5 is fair. And I understand if you would argue for 4 stars for either or both of them, and the same for the Arizona Kickers. In Seattle, Dixon, you could easily argue for a 4.5. Not going to sweat bullets over these scores here. I think these are in the right neighborhood. The big takeaway here: Seattle solid, Arizona and Los Angeles, our Rams, very promising, and the 49ers, they have some worrying to do. Probably going to be some stressful moments, especially in the kicking game. That's all I got. And we'll move on to another position group here eventually. Wednesday night, Ian and I are going to have a special guest on the show. That should be a lot of fun. Out here from Rams Up.